Hello there, welcome to yet another lesson. So today we shall be learning about sources of light. So when we say sources of light, what comes into the mind? So let's find out what sources of light mean. So what are sources of light? So sources of light refers to the things that give out light. Therefore, anything that produces or emits light is a source of light. So that is what sources of light are. So anything that what gives out light or anything that can produce light can be termed as a source of light. So let's come up with the types of sources of light. So there are two types of sources of light. We have the natural sources of light, and then we have the artificial sources of light. So these are the two main types of sources of light. So first, let's take a look at natural sources of light. So natural sources of light are the things of nature that produces light or emits light. The things that fall under these sources are mostly God-made. So the natural sources of light are the things that gives out light, which are mostly what God-made or which were created by God. So anything that was created by God, which gives out light or which emits light, can be termed as a natural source of light. Now let's take a look at some examples of natural sources of light. So the following are some examples of natural sources of light. We have the sun, we have the moon, we have the stars, we have fireflies, and then lightning. So all these uh, examples come under the natural sources of light. So you realize that all these things were created by God, and with these things they produce what? Light. So the sun gives out light, the moon, the stars, the fireflies, and then the lightning. All these gives out light, and all these were created by God. So we term them as natural sources of light. Now let's take a look at artificial sources of light. So artificial sources of light are the things created by man that produce light or emit light. So artificial sources of light are the things created by man that produce light or emit light. Alright, so now let's take a look at some examples of artificial sources of light. So the following are some examples of artificial sources of light. So we have the lantern, we have the flashlight, we have the candles, we have bulbs, and then we have fire. So these are some examples of artificial sources of light. Can you identify some artificial sources of light as well? You can take your book and then note these sources or these artificial sources of light down. Good. So today we've been able to identify what sources of light is. We've been able to identify the types of sources of light. We have the natural sources of light, and then we have the artificial sources of light. And then we learned that the natural sources of light are the things that gives out light which were created by God. So the things that give out light which were created by God can be classified under the natural sources of light. And then we also talked about the artificial sources of light. So we said the artificial sources are the things that were created by man. So the things created by man that gives out light, they fall under the artificial sources of light. We were able to identify some natural sources of light. We had the sun, the moon, the stars, the lightning. We also talked about some examples of the artificial sources of light. We talked about the flashlight, the candles, bulbs, lantern, and so on. Alright, so this brings us to the end of today's lesson. Hopefully we shall meet again, but for now it's bye bye.